The auction house smelled of old wood, dust, and ambition. Bodies pressed together in the narrow gallery, jostling for position near the front, where a mahogany lectern held the evening's crown jewel, a first edition volume of Aristotle's Poetics, bound in calfskin with gold leaf lettering that caught the gaslight like a whisper of something holy. Cordelia Vythe had no business being here. She knew that the way she knew her own heartbeat, instinctively, reluctantly, completely. Her dress was 3 seasons behind the current silhouette. Her gloves had been mended twice at the left thumb, and the small notebook clutched against her chest contained 6 years of original translations from ancient Greek that no publisher in London would touch because no publisher in London believed a woman could read ancient Greek, let alone translate it with authority. But she was here because the Aristotle was wrong. She had spotted the listing in a catalog 3 weeks ago, and within moments of reading the description, her stomach had turned. The provenance was fabricated. The binding style belonged to an 1820s reproduction, not the 1650s printing the auction house claimed, and the dedicatory inscription, supposedly penned by a member of the Medici household, contained a grammatical error that no educated Italian of that century would have committed. Someone was about to pay a fortune for a forgery, and Cordelia could not stay silent about it. She had written to the auction house. Twice. Both letters had been returned unopened, with a note suggesting she direct her concerns to her husband or father. So she had come in person, wearing her mother's pearl brooch and her best imitation of confidence, prepared to stand in the gallery and raise her objection publicly before the bidding began. What she had not prepared for was the man standing directly in front of the Aristotle, blocking her path to the lectern with the unyielding certainty of a cathedral wall. He was tall enough that she had to tilt her head back, dark-haired, with a face that might have been carved from something unforgiving, granite or opinion. His coat was cut so precisely it could only be bespoke, and the signet ring on his right hand caught the light with the quiet authority of old money. He was examining the volume with one gloved hand, turning pages with the careful reverence of someone who understood what he was holding, or thought he understood. "Excuse me," Cordelia said, pitching her voice to carry over the murmur of the crowd. "You are standing in my way." He did not look up. "I am standing in everyone's way. That is rather the point of examining the lot before bidding. I am not here to bid. I am here to prevent a fraud." That got his attention. He turned, and she was struck by the sharpness of his gaze, blue so dark it bordered on gray, assessing her with the focused precision of someone accustomed to identifying value at a glance. His eyes moved from her face, to her mended gloves, to her outdated dress, to the notebook pressed against her chest, and she watched him reach a conclusion she had seen 100 times before. Pretty, poor, irrelevant. "A fraud," he repeated, his voice carrying an amusement reserved for indulging the delusional. "And you have evidence of this. It was not a question. It was a dismissal shaped like a question. I have 6 years of scholarship, fluency in ancient Greek and Latin, a working knowledge of Renaissance bookbinding techniques, and a dedicatory inscription that contains a dative case error no literate Italian of the 17th century would have made." She opened her notebook, finding the relevant page by touch alone. The provenance traces through the Hargrove collection, which was dispersed in 1809. But the binding adhesive uses a formula that was not commercially available until 1823. The gold leaf application is mechanical, not hand-pressed. And the inscription references a member of the Medici family who died 14 years before the supposed date of dedication. She delivered this without pausing for breath, without looking up from her notes, without registering the silence that had fallen around them, until she finished and raised her eyes to find not just the stranger staring at her, but half the gallery. The auctioneer, a thin man with spectacles and visible perspiration, moved toward them. The stranger had not moved. His expression had shifted from amusement to something sharper, more attentive, as if she had changed shape in front of him. "A pretty face will not save you here," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "This room is full of men who will dismiss everything you just said because of who you are not. I am not relying on my face. I am relying on the evidence, which you have presented to a room that does not want to hear it." His gaze held hers, and she felt the weight of it like a hand on her shoulder, steadying and unsettling in equal measure. "You have just publicly accused this auction house of selling a forgery. Do you understand what happens next?" Before she could answer, the auctioneer reached them, his smile strained to the point of structural failure. "Ladies and gentlemen, I assure you, the provenance of this lot has been thoroughly verified. If this young woman has concerns, we would be happy to address them privately after the sale." "After the sale," Cordelia repeated. "After someone has paid thousands for a fake. Madam, I must insist." "She must insist louder," the stranger said. His voice had changed. The amusement was gone, replaced by something cold and commanding that made the auctioneer flinch. "Because I was about to bid on this volume, and I find myself suddenly reluctant." He took the notebook from Cordelia's hands before she could protest, scanning her notes with the speed of someone who read scholarly work the way most people read newspapers. His expression shifted again, surprise this time, genuine and poorly concealed. "These translations are yours?" he asked, glancing up. "They are not the point. They are very much the point." He turned to the auctioneer, holding the notebook open. "This woman has identified inconsistencies in the provenance, the binding materials, the inscription dating, and the gold leaf application. Are you prepared to address these concerns before proceeding?" The auctioneer's face had gone the color of old plaster. "Your Grace, I assure you." "Your Grace." The title rippled through the gallery. Cordelia's stomach plummeted. The man she had interrupted, argued with, and practically lectured on Renaissance bookbinding was a duke. "I would like an independent verification before any bids are accepted," the stranger continued, addressing the room now. "If the lady's concerns prove unfounded, I will personally apologize and double my opening bid. But if she is correct, this house has a rather serious problem." The gallery erupted, and in the center of it all, the stranger turned back to Cordelia. "You have just made yourself very interesting," he said quietly, "and very visible. I hope you are prepared for what that means. I came here to stop a fraud. I was not thinking about visibility." "No, you were not." His lips curved into something that was not quite a smile. "That is precisely why you are interesting." He extended his hand. "Oberon Hale, Duke of Thornfield. And you are the woman who just set fire to my evening. Cordelia Vaith. And your evening was built on a forgery, so perhaps it deserved burning." Something flickered in his eyes, bright and dangerous. "Yes," he said slowly. "Perhaps it did." The auction was suspended. Cordelia found herself standing next to a duke who had not released her notebook. "Miss Vaith," he said, "I believe we need to have a conversation. About you." He tucked her notebook into his coat pocket. "I have a carriage outside. I am offering you a ride home and a conversation, not an abduction. I do not get into carriages with strangers. We are not strangers. I know your name, your scholarly expertise, and your glove size. You know my title and my taste in rare books. By London standards, we are practically engaged. Come, Miss Vaith. You have nowhere else to go tonight, and I have a proposition." The word should have alarmed her. Instead, it sparked something she had spent years trying to smother: curiosity. Against every rational instinct, she followed him out of the gallery and into the sharp night air, where a black lacquered carriage waited, drawn by matched grays that probably cost more than her father's annual income. She climbed in. The leather seats were warm, the interior smelled of sandalwood and books, and the Duke of Thornfield sat across from her, with her notebook still in his pocket, and an expression that suggested he was several moves ahead in a game she did not yet know she was playing. The carriage rolled through lamplit streets, while Cordelia tried to decide whether she had just made the bravest or the stupidest decision of her life. The Duke sat across from her in perfect stillness, watching her with that unsettling blue-gray gaze that missed nothing. "Your notebook," he said. "These translations from the poetics. You did them yourself?" "I told you. 6 years of work. My father taught me Greek and Latin before he lost the school. After that, self-taught from his library, before we had to sell most of it. He ran a small academy for boys in Harrowden, classical languages, rhetoric, philosophy. Then the building's owner tripled the rent, and a competing school opened with a wealthy patron. The academy closed in 1819. He has not been the same since. And your mother takes in copying work for a solicitor. She has beautiful handwriting and no complaints, ever. Siblings? 1 brother, Phineas. He is 20 and convinced that the next venture will be the one that changes everything. He has been saying that since he was 16. She met his eyes. "Why are you asking me all of this?" "Because I need to understand who you are before I make you an offer." The carriage turned a corner, and gaslight swept across his face, illuminating the sharp planes and shadowed hollows. He looked carved from something expensive and unforgiving. But his eyes were careful, calculating, not cruel. "My situation is this," he said. "I am in possession of one of the largest private libraries in England. My father spent 40 years building it before his death, 14 months ago. The collection is extraordinary. It is also in complete disarray, and I have reason to believe that several pieces may be forgeries, similar to the one you identified tonight. I need someone to catalog, authenticate, and organize the entire library. And you think I am qualified based on 5 minutes of argument? I think you identified a forgery that 3 professional authenticators missed. And I think you need this opportunity as much as I need your expertise." "A position," he proposed. "Thornfield Hall. Room, board, full access to the collection, a salary to support her family. His sister lived there. Cordelia would be presented as her companion as well. A respectable cover. A cover. So, this is not simply a scholarly appointment. It is a performance. Everything in society is a performance, Miss Vaith. I am simply offering you a stage where your actual talents might be useful." "Why me?" she asked. "You could hire any scholar in London, and every one of them would tell me what I want to hear rather than what I need to know. You told the truth in a room full of people who could destroy your reputation. That is rarer than any first edition." She took her notebook back, climbed down, and let herself inside. Her mother was still awake, bent over legal documents. "I found a forgery, a duke, and possibly a job." So Cordelia told her everything. Her mother listened completely, her hands folded around a cup of tea that went cold while Cordelia talked. "A duke," her mother said carefully, "offering you a position in his household. You are 24 years old, educated beyond your station, and you have never had the opportunity to use what you know. A man offering you that opportunity, especially now. That is not simply employment, Cordelia. That is temptation." To do what? To believe it can last. But her mother did not say no. And in the morning, Cordelia wrote a single line on her best paper. "I accept your offer, Your Grace. I will be ready by Saturday." The carriage arrived at 7 on Saturday morning. Cordelia's mother pressed ginger biscuits into her hands. Phineas carried her trunk and promised, with theatrical gravity, to challenge the Duke if he was terrible. Her father, sitting by the window with a book he was not reading, placed one hand on her head the way he had when she was small. "Do not let them make you less," he said. His voice was thin but certain. "They will try. The world always tries to make scholars less when they are women. You hold on to what you know, Cordelia. What you know is yours. No one can take it." She kissed his forehead and left before her composure cracked. When the carriage crested the final hill and Thornfield Hall appeared below, she stopped rehearsing the speeches she would never give. The house was vast in a way that suggested centuries of accumulation. Stone the color of warm honey, windows that caught the late afternoon sun and threw it back in sheets of gold, gardens rolling away toward woods and water. Mrs. Ainsley, the housekeeper, showed her to the blue suite, 3 times the size of her bedroom at home. Dresses were waiting in the wardrobe, selected by Lady Isabeau, who arrived moments later with the energy of a summer storm. Where the Duke was all sharp edges and controlled intensity, Isabeau was warmth given form. Perhaps 19, with chestnut hair pinned loosely, brown eyes that radiated immediate friendliness. "Oberon said you were brilliant and terrifying," Isabeau declared, clasping both of Cordelia's hands, which from him is the highest possible compliment, because he finds almost everyone boring and beneath notice. Over tea, Isabeau told her about their father, a riding accident. Very sudden. Oberon found him. He has not been the same since. He manages everything perfectly, but he does it like a machine. All function, no feeling. What he actually needs is to stop punishing himself for not being there when father fell. The Thornfield Library occupied the entire east wing. 2 stories of shelves rose from floor to gallery, connected by a spiral staircase in dark iron. The smell was extraordinary: paper and leather and wood polish and the faint sweetness of old ink. And it was chaos. Beautiful, extraordinary chaos. Somewhere above 14,000 volumes, and those were only the ones that had been counted. She moved to the nearest shelf. A Venetian printing of Euclid, a French treatise on optics, a volume of Persian poetry with hand-painted illuminations. And that was only the first 3 feet. The Duke appeared in the doorway. His gaze moved from her face to the shelf she was touching, and something shifted in his expression. "I see you have found the library. I see a collection that has been loved more than it has been organized. That is not a catastrophe. It is an inheritance that needs someone to listen to it." His eyebrow rose. "Books do not speak, Miss Vaith. Every book speaks, Your Grace. You simply have to know the language." He warned her about the Dowager. "I suggest you bring your notebook. A pretty face will not save you with the Dowager Duchess of Thornfield. But I suspect you have something far more dangerous: the ability to be right." The Dowager Duchess of Thornfield arrived at 10:30. Isabeau warned Cordelia at the window. "She is early. She is never early. That means she has already heard about you and wants answers." Mrs. Ainsley appeared. "The Dowager Duchess requests Miss Vaith's presence in the morning room, immediately." The Dowager sat in a high-backed chair, her posture so perfect it made geometry look careless. Her eyes, the same dark blue-gray as her grandson's, but sharpened by decades, fixed on Cordelia. "You are 24 years old, the daughter of a failed schoolmaster, with no university credentials. Tell me why I should take you seriously." "Because I am right. And if your grandson's collection contains fakes, you need someone who can identify them before they embarrass this family publicly." She opened her notebook. "Since arriving yesterday, I have spent 4 hours in the library. I have identified 3 volumes with questionable provenance, 2 with binding inconsistencies, and 1 illuminated manuscript, whose pigment composition is almost certainly 19th century, despite being catalogued as 15th. The dowager read through the notes, her expression shifting through irritation, surprise, and grudging recognition. You found all of this in 4 hours. Your son built an extraordinary collection, Your Grace. But he trusted dealers who did not deserve that trust. My son was a brilliant man, she said. Brilliant and reckless with his heart. He married for passion and was rewarded with 20 years of happiness. Then she died, giving birth to Isabeau. 20 years of a man pouring everything into books, and his children, because the woman he loved was gone. She turned from the window, and Cordelia saw fear in her face. I will not watch that happen again. If you give him hope and then take it away, I will not forgive you. Do you understand what it means to be the person who makes a grieving man feel alive again? That is a responsibility, Miss Vaith, not a romance. And responsibilities have consequences. She swept from the room, leaving behind the scent of lavender water and a warning that felt like prophecy. Isabeau burst in moments later. You survived. She only threatens people she intends to keep around. She told me not to give your brother hope, and then take it away. Isabeau softened. She told our mother something similar, 30 years ago. Mother ignored her. Mother was right to ignore her. The days that followed established a rhythm that Cordelia found both comforting and quietly devastating. She rose early, breakfasted with Isabeau, while Oberon took his meal alone in his study, then spent the morning in the library, cataloging, sorting, and examining volumes with the methodical intensity that had made her father's students both love and fear him. The work was consuming. Each shelf revealed new treasures and new questions. A folio of botanical illustrations that might have been painted by a student of Redoubt. A collection of letters between 2 18th-century philosophers that had never been published. A medieval psalter with marginalia in 3 languages. And woven among the genuine pieces, the fakes, subtle and professionally done. Volumes that looked right at first glance, but fell apart under scrutiny, the way a beautiful sentence collapses when you realize the grammar is wrong. She kept meticulous records. Every volume received an entry in her ledger. She worked in silence, mostly, and Oberon appeared in the library each evening. They worked in parallel, barely speaking, occupying the same space, in a silence that felt more companionable than any conversation she had ever had. On the 4th evening, he broke the pattern. You have been staring at that manuscript for 20 minutes without writing anything, he said. Cordelia showed him the volume. This is modern. The parchment has been artificially aged with tea staining, and the ink contains a compound, not synthesized until 1792. Someone sold your father a 16th-century transcription of Sappho manufactured in a workshop within the last 30 years. 300 pounds, the ledger says. That is the danger of being a passionate collector, she told him. Passion makes people see what they hope for, instead of what exists. You are not speaking only about books, he said. I am speaking exactly about books. If you hear something else, that is your interpretation. He told her about his father. My father did not grieve for 20 years. He loved for 20 years. There is a difference my grandmother has never understood. He lived a full life while carrying someone he could not forget. That is not grief. That is loyalty. His jaw tightened. I worshipped him. And I was in Scotland when he died, settling a boundary dispute that could have waited. I chose duty over presence, and I was not there when he fell from his horse. I was not there when he asked for me. Your father's library speaks for him, Cordelia said. Every volume he collected was an act of curiosity and hope. A man who builds a library of 14,000 books believes in the future. That is not the legacy of someone who wanted his son to drown in regret. He stared at her. Then he returned to his desk. When he picked up his pen, his hand was not quite steady. As she rose to leave, he spoke without looking up. Cordelia. It was the first time he had used her given name. Thank you for listening. The Whitmore exhibition was the first social event, and it began with a disaster. Isabeau had commissioned a gown of midnight blue velvet. Small sapphire drops adorned her ears. The dowager examined her and offered a single nod. Adequate, she said, which Isabeau translated as practically glowing praise. Oberon was waiting in the entrance hall. He wore formal evening clothes that made him look like a portrait come to life, all sharp lines and dark authority. His gaze swept over Cordelia once, quickly, and she saw something flash across his expression before he controlled it. Something that looked dangerously close to the way he looked at a rare manuscript he wanted to acquire. Shall we? He offered his arm to his grandmother first, as propriety demanded, and Isabeau took Cordelia's arm with conspiratorial warmth. The Whitmore Gallery was impressive despite the dowager's dismissal. Paintings lined the walls, sculptures occupied pedestals, and display cases held a rotating collection of antiquities and rare books. Cordelia's professional eye immediately began cataloging, assessing, categorizing. Two of the paintings were almost certainly misattributed. A Roman bust had a suspiciously modern chisel pattern, and the centerpiece of the book collection, a supposedly medieval book of hours, had margins that were too uniform for hand-cut vellum. She kept these observations to herself. Tonight was about social survival, not scholarly confrontation. Oberon introduced her to a succession of faces and titles. Lord Ashworth, who collected maps. Mrs. Pentland, who patronized young artists. The Hartwell sisters, who were kind and forgettable. Sir Reginald himself, who pumped her hand with moist enthusiasm and declared any friend of the Hales a friend of his. And then there was Lady Serena Blackwood. She arrived late, which Cordelia would learn was strategic, sweeping into the gallery in ivory silk with diamonds at her throat, and the absolute certainty of someone who had never once wondered whether she belonged. She was stunning. Golden hair, gray eyes, the kind of bone structure that portrait painters spent careers trying to capture. She moved through the crowd with fluid grace, and people parted for her instinctively, drawn and wary in equal measure. Lady Serena. Isabeau's voice dropped to a murmur. She was the front-runner for Oberon before father died. Grandmother approved the match. Everyone assumed it was settled. Then the accident happened, and Oberon withdrew from society entirely. Serena waited 6 months, then began telling everyone she had ended things because he was too consumed by grief to be a proper husband. It was a lie, but a convincing one. So she is the rival. She is the threat. Isabeau's grip on her arm tightened. She is everything grandmother wants for Oberon. Titled, wealthy, connected, and beautiful. And she has never forgiven him for making her wait. Lady Serena reached them with the inevitability of weather. Your Grace. Her voice was honey over steel, warm on the surface with something unyielding underneath. How wonderful to see you in society again. We have all been so concerned. Your concern is noted, Lady Serena. Oberon's tone was courteous and completely flat. Serena's gaze shifted to Cordelia, and the assessment was immediate, thorough, and brutal. She took in the borrowed sapphires, the provincial seamstress's work, the absence of family jewels or social armor, and smiled the way a cat smiles at something small and manageable. And who is your companion this evening? Miss Cordelia Vaith. She is working with our family's library and staying at Thornfield as Isabeau's guest. A librarian. How original. Serena's smile widened. I did not realize you had developed an interest in academic staffing, Your Grace. Is Miss Vaith one of those delightful blue stockings one hears about? All Latin and opinions, and no sense of occasion? The insult was wrapped in silk, but its edges were sharp. Cordelia felt the cut and chose precision over silence. I do read Latin, Lady Serena. I also read Greek, some French, and enough Italian to navigate a Renaissance inscription. As for sense of occasion, I believe the occasion is an exhibition of Sir Reginald's collection, which I have been examining with great interest. She paused, letting the words settle. Have you had a chance to look at the Book of Hours in the center case? The illuminations are remarkable, though I confess I am curious about the vellum preparation. It seems unusually consistent for a medieval workshop. The observation was innocuous on the surface, but Cordelia delivered it with the same quiet authority she had used at the auction house. She was not attacking, she was demonstrating. There is a difference between a pretty face and a prepared mind, and she intended the distinction to be visible. Serena's smile froze. I am afraid I do not examine books quite so closely. No, Cordelia agreed pleasantly. I imagine you do not. Beside her, she felt rather than saw Oberon's reaction, a slight tension in his posture that might have been alarm or might have been admiration. The dowager, who had materialized nearby with the silent menace of a warship, watched the exchange with narrowed eyes. Serena recovered with practiced grace. How charming! A scholar with spirit. I do hope you enjoy your time at Thornfield, Miss Vaith. Country houses can be so isolating for those accustomed to more modest surroundings. One does miss familiar comforts. I find the library quite comfortable, thank you. 14,000 volumes are excellent company. The temperature between them could have frosted glass. Serena held Cordelia's gaze for a beat too long, then turned to Oberon with a warmth so calculated it practically came with annotations. Your Grace, I had hoped we might speak privately this evening. There are matters from before your father's passing that remain unresolved between us. I was not aware anything remained unresolved, Lady Serena. You made your position quite clear when you announced to London that you had ended our association. A flicker of something raw crossed Serena's face, anger or shame, or both. That was a misunderstanding. I was trying to protect your reputation during a difficult time. My reputation did not require protection. It required honesty. If you will excuse me, I promise to show Miss Vaith the Whitmore Cartography Collection. She has expertise in period authentication that Sir Reginald might find enlightening. He offered Cordelia his arm, and they walked to a smaller room where maps hung on every wall. She sees you as a threat, he said, because you possess something she does not. Latin? Substance. He told her he wanted her to call him Oberon. Miss Vaith and your Grace feel like armor, he said, and I find myself wanting less of it when you are near. Before she could respond, Isabeau appeared. Lady Serena is telling everyone that Miss Vaith insulted the Book of Hours. She fights with narrative, Cordelia, and right now she is writing a story in which you are the villain. Then I need to rewrite it. Then they need to hear mine. She pulled free from Isabeau's grip and walked back into the main gallery, where Serena Blackwood was indeed holding court beside a table of champagne flutes, surrounded by a cluster of guests who listened with the avid attention of people watching a fire they did not have to put out. Oberon stood nearby, his expression controlled, clearly preparing to intervene with social precision. But Cordelia did not wait for him. She walked directly to Sir Reginald, who was hovering at the edge of the group with the anxious expression of a host watching his evening collapse. Sir Reginald, she said, her voice carrying with the clarity her father had spent years teaching her to project. I understand there has been a misunderstanding about my comments regarding your Book of Hours. I want to assure you that my observation was not a criticism. It was admiration. The illuminations are genuinely extraordinary, and if the vellum preparation is indeed consistent throughout, It may suggest that the workshop had access to techniques more advanced than previously documented. That would make your volume more significant, not less. It was a reframe, a deliberate, tactical reframe that took Serena's narrative of insult and inverted it into a narrative of scholarly validation. Sir Reginald's face transformed from anxiety to delight. "More significant," he repeated. "Potentially. I would need to examine it more closely, naturally. But if you would permit me to include your Book of Hours in a comparative study I am conducting alongside the Thornfield collection, I believe the results could be quite illuminating." Pun intended. Someone laughed. Then someone else. The tension in the room cracked and reformed around Cordelia, no longer hostile, but curious, impressed, entertained. Sir Reginald pumped her hand again. "My dear Miss Vaith, I would be honored, absolutely honored. You must come back, examine anything you like. The collection is at your disposal." She felt Oberon's gaze on her from across the room, heavy with something she was not ready to name. When she finally allowed herself to glance at him, he was not smiling, but his eyes were. The warmth in them was unmistakable and entirely at odds with the controlled exterior he presented to the world. Serena stood silent, her champagne untouched, watching Cordelia with an expression that had shifted from contempt to something far more dangerous. Recognition. She had underestimated Cordelia Vaith. She would not make that mistake again. 3 days after the Whitmore exhibition, Cordelia found a letter hidden inside a volume of Herodotus on the second gallery shelf. It was not part of the collection. It was personal, written in the late Duke's hand, addressed to no one, dated 6 weeks before his death. She recognized the handwriting from the marginalia she had been cataloging for days, the same careful, slightly slanted script that filled the edges of philosophy texts with questions and arguments and the occasional sketch of a flower. She should not have read it. It was private, a dead man's thoughts pressed between pages like a leaf preserved by accident. But the first line caught her eye before propriety could intervene. "I am beginning to suspect that the truest things in life are the ones we almost fail to say." She read the rest, standing on the gallery stairs, her cataloging forgotten, her heart beating in her throat. The letter was a meditation on silence, on the words the late Duke had never spoken to his children, his mother, the memory of his wife. On the way, grief had become a language he spoke fluently but could not translate for others. On the particular loneliness of being surrounded by people who loved you, and not knowing how to tell them that love alone was not enough, that what he needed was for someone to sit with him in the darkness without trying to light a candle. The final paragraph made her eyes burn. "I have filled this house with books because books never demand that you be well. They do not ask how you are, and then look disappointed when the answer is not what they hoped. They sit on their shelves and wait, patient and permanent. And when you are ready, they offer you someone else's thoughts, so that you do not have to be alone with your own. My children deserve better than a father who hides in libraries. My mother deserves better than a son who answers duty with silence. But I do not know how to be better. I only know how to be here, among the pages, where the quiet does not feel like failure." Cordelia folded the letter carefully and held it against her chest. She was still standing there when Oberon entered the library below. He looked up, saw her on the gallery stairs, and frowned. "You have been up there for over an hour. Alice said you missed tea. I found something." She descended the stairs, the letter in her hands. It was inside the Herodotus, Volume 3, second shelf. She held it out to him. He took it, read the first line, and went very still. She watched him read the way she watched the weather change, with attention and respect for forces beyond her control. His face did not move. His hands did not tremble. But something behind his eyes shifted, tectonic and slow, like a foundation settling under new weight. When he finished, he did not speak immediately. He folded the letter along its original creases and held it the way she had, pressed against his chest, as if the paper itself contained warmth. "He never said any of this," Oberon said finally. His voice was rough. "Not to me. Not to anyone." Perhaps he could not. Perhaps the only way he could say it was to write it and hide it where someone would find it eventually. In the Herodotus, Oberon's laugh was broken. Father loved Herodotus. He used to say that history was just gossip with better sources. Cordelia smiled despite the ache in her throat. "He sounds like someone I would have liked very much. He would have liked you." Oberon looked at her, and the walls were down. Not cracked, not fractured, but genuinely absent, as if the letter had dissolved whatever compound held them in place. You would have argued about translations, and he would have loved every minute of it. The library felt smaller suddenly, warmer. The late afternoon light caught dust motes in the air between them, turning them gold, and Cordelia was aware with painful clarity that she was standing very close to a man who was holding his dead father's hidden confession and looking at her as if she were the only solid thing in a world that kept shifting. "I should catalog this," she said softly, "for the collection records." "No." He stepped closer. "Not everything belongs in a catalog. Some things are just for us." The word us landed between them with the weight of a door closing, or opening. She could not tell which. "Oberon." He kissed her. It was not sudden. It was not impulsive. It was deliberate, the way he did everything, his hand lifting to her jaw, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone, his mouth finding hers with the careful precision of someone who had thought about this moment and chosen it consciously. She tasted tea and something warmer, felt the slight roughness of his jaw against her skin, heard the sound he made when she kissed him back, a low exhale that sounded like relief, like breathing after holding your breath for a very long time. When they parted, his forehead rested against hers, and his hand remained on her face, gentle and warm. "That was not in our arrangement," she whispered. "No." His voice was quiet. "That was entirely outside our arrangement." "What do we do now?" "I do not know." He pulled back enough to look at her, and his expression was raw in a way she had never seen. "I know what I want. But what I want and what is wise are not the same thing. When has wisdom ever made anyone happy?" His lips curved. "Is that a scholarly opinion?" "It is a human one." They stood in the fading light, close enough to touch, but not touching, the letter between them and the ghost of a kiss that had changed the architecture of everything. "We need to be careful," Oberon said finally. "My grandmother, Serena, society. If this becomes public before we understand what it is, they will use it against you. Against us. I know. And I will not let that happen. Whatever this is, whatever it becomes, I will protect it. I give you my word." She believed him. That was the most frightening thing of all. The careful equilibrium lasted 11 days before Isabeau cornered Cordelia in the morning room. "Something has changed between you and Oberon. He smiled at breakfast yesterday." Smiled. He has not smiled at breakfast in 14 months. "You are more than his librarian," Isabeau said, "and everyone in this house knows it. If I can see it, grandmother can see it. And if grandmother can see it, Serena will hear about it within the week." On the 12th day, Serena arrived at Thornfield uninvited, bringing her mother, Lady Blackwood. In the drawing room, Serena offered false apologies, while Lady Blackwood delivered the real attack. Professional. Lady Blackwood spoke for the first time, her voice carrying the careful weight of someone who treated words like currency, an interesting choice of word for a woman living in a duke's household, without formal employment, without professional credentials, and without, if you will forgive my directness, without any social standing that would ordinarily justify such an arrangement. The room temperature dropped. Cordelia felt Isabeau's hand tighten on hers. "Miss Vaith is my companion," Isabeau said, her voice carrying an edge Cordelia had never heard from her, "and the finest classical scholar any of us has ever encountered. Her credentials are her work, which speaks for itself. Work conducted inside your brother's private library." Lady Blackwood's smile was thin. "Unchaperoned, I presume, during those long evening hours when the household has retired. You must understand how that appears, Lady Isabeau, to those of us who care about propriety." The accusation was not subtle. It landed in the room like a blade driven into a table, vibrating with intent. Oberon turned from the window. His voice was quiet, which Cordelia had learned was far more dangerous than his voice raised. "Lady Blackwood, if you have come to my home to impugn the character of a woman under my family's protection, I suggest you reconsider. The library door remains open during every working hour. The household staff can attest to Miss Vaith's conduct, which has been beyond reproach. If you have heard rumors to the contrary, I encourage you to consider their source." His gaze moved to Serena, and the implication was unmistakable. Serena's composure flickered. "I have said nothing, Oberon. You rarely need to. You are remarkably skilled at ensuring others say things for you." The drawing room felt like a battlefield after the first volley. Smoke and silence, and the sound of positions being reassessed. The Dowager sat very still, her expression unreadable, and Cordelia realized with a sinking feeling that the older woman had not spoken in defense of her, had not confirmed Isabeau's claims, had simply watched. That silence was louder than any accusation. Lady Blackwood stood, smoothing her skirts. "We have taken enough of your time. Come, Serena. We are expected at Lattimore before dark." She paused at the door. "I do hope Miss Vaith enjoys the remainder of her stay at Thornfield, however long it lasts." They swept out, and the room exhaled. "Well," Isabeau said into the silence, "that was a declaration of war." "It was a warning shot," Oberon corrected. "The war comes later." He turned to Cordelia, and his expression cracked just enough for her to see the worry underneath. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine." But she was not fine. She was calculating, running through the implications with the same methodical precision she applied to provenance records and binding analysis. Lady Blackwood had come to establish a narrative. Librarian with no credentials, no standing, no chaperone, living intimately in a duke's household. It did not matter that the narrative was false. It mattered that it was plausible, and plausibility was all society needed to destroy a reputation. She looked at the Dowager, who had still not spoken. "Your Grace," Cordelia said, "you did not defend me." The room went very quiet. The Dowager met her eyes, and Cordelia saw something unexpected. Not hostility, not disapproval. Sorrow. "I did not defend you," the Dowager said carefully, "because defending you would confirm that there is something to defend. If I had spoken in your favor, with the same heat as Oberon, Lady Blackwood would have left this house certain that my grandson's attachment to you is personal, not professional. My silence was protection, not abandonment." "It did not feel like protection," Cordelia said. "No," the Dowager's voice softened marginally. "I imagine it did not. But the truth, Miss Vaith, is that Lady Blackwood is not wrong about appearances. You are living in my grandson's home. You spend your evenings in his library. You are becoming entangled in a situation that will not end cleanly, regardless of how it ends." She paused. "I told you this would happen. I told you the moment you became more than a librarian, it would cost you. And now you must decide whether the cost is worth paying. Cordelia looked at Oberon, whose face was carefully neutral, but whose eyes burned with something he was fighting to contain. She looked at Isabeau, who was gripping her hand so tightly it hurt. She looked at the Dowager, whose warning from the first day echoed in her memory like a bell struck twice. If you give him hope and then take it away, I will not forgive you. She was not sure anymore who would be taking hope away from whom. Cordelia packed in the dark, not because she needed to. The hour was barely past midnight, and no one would notice her leaving before dawn, but because packing in the dark felt honest. She was leaving a life that had never truly been hers, and doing it without the comfort of clear sight seemed appropriate. She folded the amber dress first, then the midnight blue velvet, then the other gowns Isabeau had provided. She placed them in the wardrobe rather than her trunk. They were borrowed, like everything here. The sapphire earrings went into their box on the dressing table. The writing paper, unused, went back into the desk drawer. She kept 3 things: her notebooks, filled with months of cataloging work that belonged to her, regardless of circumstance; her original translations, battered and ink-stained; the 6 years of scholarship that had started everything; and a single pressed flower, a sprig of lavender she had found between the pages of the Herodotus the day she discovered the late Duke's letter, which she chose to believe he had placed there deliberately, a bookmark made of something living. She wrote 2 letters by candlelight. The first was to Isabeau. Dear Isabeau, you are the most generous and fierce person I have ever known. You welcomed me without question, defended me without hesitation, and treated me like family when I had no claim to that kindness. I am leaving because staying has become selfish. My presence causes your brother pain and your family scandal. I will not be the reason Thornfield becomes a battleground. Please do not blame yourself. You gave me something I have never had before, a friend who saw me as I am and thought that was enough. I will carry that always, with love and gratitude, Cordelia. The second letter took 4 attempts. She wrote and discarded 3 versions, each too honest or not honest enough, before settling on words that felt like stones in her mouth. Oberon. I am returning home. The situation at Thornfield has become untenable, and I believe my departure is necessary to protect your family from the scrutiny my presence invites. My cataloging notes are complete through the second gallery. The authentication ledger contains detailed assessments of every volume I examined, including the 17 I have identified as likely forgeries. The work can be continued by any competent scholar with access to my methodology, which I have documented in the brown notebook on the library desk. Please do not interpret this as rejection. It is the opposite. I am leaving because what I feel for you has made it impossible to remain here as a professional, and impossible to remain here as anything else without destroying everything you have built. You deserve someone whose presence does not cost you. You deserve peace. Thank you for the library. Thank you for your father's letter. Thank you for making me believe, even temporarily, that what I know matters as much as who I am. Yours, Cordelia. She sealed both letters and placed them on the writing desk, where Alice would find them in the morning. Then she carried her trunk down the servants' staircase, moving slowly in the dark, and let herself out through the kitchen door into the gray pre-dawn. The walk to the village took an hour. She hired a cart to the nearest coaching inn and waited for the morning post to carry her south, sitting on a wooden bench with her trunk at her feet and her translations in her lap, and the distinct sensation that she had just performed surgery on herself without anesthetic. Home was smaller than she remembered. The rooms had shrunk, or she had expanded, or both. Her mother opened the door, took one look at her face, and pulled her inside without questions. Her father glanced up from his chair nodded as if she had only been gone an afternoon, and returned to his book. Phineas was not there. A note on the kitchen table said he had gone to London on business, which meant he was chasing another venture with another fast-talking partner, and Cordelia did not have the energy to worry about it. For 3 days, she tried to reassemble her old life. She wrote to her former tutoring families. She organized her translations. She helped her mother with the copying work, her handwriting steady even when her thoughts were not. At night, she lay in her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about a library that smelled of cedar and paper and a man whose kiss had tasted like relief. On the 4th day, her mother sat down across from her at the kitchen table and set 2 cups of tea between them like a negotiator establishing terms. "You are miserable," her mother said. "This is not an accusation. It is an observation. I am readjusting. It takes time. You are not readjusting. You are retreating. There is a difference, and you know it because you are your father's daughter, and retreating is what he did when the academy closed, and you swore you would never do the same." The words cut because they were precise. Cordelia wrapped her hands around her teacup and said nothing. "Tell me what happened," her mother said. "Not the facts. I can see the facts. Tell me what you feel." So Cordelia told her. Not the chronology, not the social maneuvering, not the provenance records and forgery assessments. She told her about the library at dusk, with the fire lit, and the books breathing around them. About a man who read her notebook like it mattered. About a kiss that felt like the answer to a question she had not known she was asking. About a grandmother whose warnings were love in disguise. About a rival whose cruelty was just fear wearing diamonds. About leaving because staying meant wanting something she could not have without costing someone else everything. Her mother listened completely, the way she always did. And when Cordelia finished, the kitchen was quiet except for the clock. "You left to protect him," her mother said. "Yes. And who protects you?" Cordelia's composure cracked. The tears came silently, the way she had learned to cry, without sound, without fuss, without burdening anyone with the mess of her feelings. Her mother moved around the table and held her, and Cordelia let herself be held the way she had, not since she was a child, completely and without pretense. "You have spent your entire life being strong for this family," her mother murmured against her hair. "Being clever, being useful, being the one who holds things together. When do you get to be the one who is held? I am fine. You are not fine. And that is allowed, Cordelia. Being not fine is allowed. Running away from the one person who sees you, who truly sees you, that is not strength. That is fear pretending to be wisdom. It is not that simple." "No." Her mother pulled back, holding Cordelia's face in her hands. "It is not simple. But since when has anything worth having been simple? Your father and I had nothing when we married. Nothing but his books and my stubbornness and the absolute certainty that we would rather struggle together than be comfortable apart. Was it easy? Never. Was it worth it? Every single day." She kissed Cordelia's forehead and stood. "I cannot tell you what to do, but I can tell you that the woman who walked into an auction house and told the truth to a room full of powerful men is braver than the woman sitting in this kitchen telling herself she is not enough." Cordelia sat alone for a long time after her mother left. The tea grew cold. The clock ticked, and somewhere inside the careful architecture of logic and self-protection she had built, something fundamental shifted. The carriage arrived on the 5th day. Not a hired coach, not a public post. The same black lacquered carriage with matched grays that had carried her to Thornfield the first time, pulling up to her narrow street with the quiet authority of a world that refused to let her go. Phineas opened the door before Cordelia could reach it which told her immediately that her brother had been involved in whatever was about to happen. He stood on the front step with the strained expression of someone who had been sworn to secrecies and was finding the obligation physically painful. "There is someone here to see you," he said. Cordelia's heart slammed against her ribs. She walked past him into the small parlor, expecting Oberon, preparing herself for Oberon, and found Isabeau. The younger woman stood in the center of the room, still wearing her traveling cloak, her face flushed from the journey, and her eyes bright with something fierce and determined. She held a leather portfolio in her hands, and when she saw Cordelia, her expression cycled through relief, anger, and love in rapid succession. "You left," Isabeau said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. "You left without saying goodbye. You left a letter, which is not the same thing. And then you disappeared before dawn like a thief, except what you stole was yourself, and that is considerably worse. Isabeau, I am sorry. Sorry is insufficient. Do you know what happened after you left?" Oberon read your letter and did not speak for an entire day. Not a word. Not to me, not to grandmother, not to the staff. He sat in the library with your cataloging notes spread around him and your letter in his hand, and he just existed there, silent, like a man who had been told something he already knew but had been refusing to hear. Cordelia's throat closed. She pressed her fingers to her mouth to keep the sound inside. Grandmother, Isabeau continued, was furious, not at you, at herself. She said she had pushed too hard, that her silence during Lady Blackwood's visit had been a miscalculation, that she had treated your feelings as expendable in service of strategy. She has been writing letters of apology, which for grandmother is the emotional equivalent of throwing herself on a sword. And Serena has been telling everyone who will listen that you fled in disgrace, that the Duke discovered your scholarship was fraudulent and dismissed you, that the entire arrangement was a scandal barely contained. Isabeau's jaw set. She is writing the narrative, Cordelia, the one I warned you about, and you are not there to challenge it. Cordelia sank into a chair. I left to protect your family from exactly this kind of scrutiny. You left to protect yourself from hoping. There is a difference, and I love you too much to pretend otherwise. Isabeau knelt in front of her, setting the portfolio on the floor. I brought you something, from Oberon. He does not know I am here, which means I will face his wrath when I return. But he is accustomed to my insubordination, and frankly, it will give him something to feel, besides grief. She opened the portfolio and removed a sheaf of papers. Letters, Cordelia realized. Dozens of them, written in different hands, on different papers, spanning what appeared to be several weeks. These are responses to your authentication work, Isabeau said. After you left, Oberon sent your methodology notes and your forgery assessments to 6 different scholars at Oxford and Cambridge. He did not tell them the analysis was performed by a woman. He simply submitted the work and asked for peer review. Cordelia's hands trembled as she took the letters. She read them one by one, her vision blurring. Exceptional rigor. Methodology unprecedented in its thoroughness. The identification of the Sappho forgery alone represents a significant contribution to the field of manuscript authentication. Whoever conducted this analysis possesses a command of classical languages and material science that would be an asset to any academic institution in Europe. I would very much like to meet the scholar responsible for this work. She read them all, then read them again, and then set them down on her lap and pressed both hands over her face, because the magnitude of what Oberon had done was crashing over her like a wave. He had not sent scholars to replace her. He had sent her work into the world under conditions where it would be judged on its merits alone, stripped of gender, stripped of class, stripped of every social barrier that had stood between Cordelia Vaith and recognition for her entire life. He had given her proof, not of his feelings, though those were implicit in every page. Proof that she was right, that her scholarship was real, that the thing she carried inside her, the knowledge and precision and relentless commitment to truth, was not a fantasy or a hobby or a pretty trick. It was extraordinary, and the best minds in England agreed. "Why did he do this?" she whispered. "Because he loves you," Isabeau said simply. "And because he knows that what you need is not a duke or a house or a position in society. What you need is to be seen for what you are. And he wanted to make sure that when you looked at yourself, you could not pretend to be less than you are ever again." Cordelia wept, not silently this time, not the controlled, considerate tears she had learned to produce. She wept with her whole body, grief and gratitude, and the terrible relief of being known, truly known, by someone who had turned his considerable power not toward possessing her, but toward proving her. Isabeau held her through it. And when the storm passed, and Cordelia sat red-eyed and raw in her mother's parlor, with academic validation scattered across her lap, and a younger woman's arms around her shoulders, she heard herself say the words she had been refusing to speak. "I need to go back." Isabeau squeezed her so hard it hurt. "The carriage is waiting." "Now?" "He has been drowning for 5 days, Cordelia. I would prefer we not make it 6. Cordelia looked at the letters one more time. Then she looked at her mother, who had appeared in the doorway with the quiet prescience of someone who had been expecting this exact moment. "Go," her mother said. "And this time, stay." Cordelia packed nothing. She took the letters, her translations, the pressed lavender, and herself, and climbed into the carriage that had come to bring her home. Not to the house where she had grown up, to the house where she had grown into who she was supposed to be. Thornfield appeared through the carriage window as the sun was setting. The honey-colored stone turned amber in the fading light, the windows glowing from within. Cordelia's heart hammered so violently she could feel it in her fingertips. Isabeau touched her hand. "He will be in the library. He is always in the library now." Cordelia walked through the entrance hall, past the portraits of Hale ancestors who watched with their usual aristocratic judgment, past Mrs. Ainsley, who pressed a hand to her heart and said nothing, past Alice, who actually did cry, and opened the library doors. Oberon was exactly where Isabeau said he would be, seated at the desk, surrounded by Cordelia's cataloging notes spread in a careful semicircle, her authentication ledger open before him, her brown methodology notebook propped against a stack of volumes, as if he had been reading it repeatedly. He looked up. The expression on his face was something she would carry for the rest of her life. Not relief, not joy, not the careful control she had grown accustomed to seeing. It was recognition, the look of a man who had been searching for something and found it walking through his door. "You came back," he said. His voice was rough. "You sent my work to Oxford. I sent your work where it belonged." He stood, and she saw how much the 5 days had cost him. The shadows beneath his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the slight unsteadiness of his hands. "You left without letting me fight for this. There was nothing to fight for. Lady Blackwood was right. My presence here was indefensible. Your presence here was the only defensible thing in my life." He crossed the room to her, stopping just close enough that she could feel the warmth of him without contact. "You left a letter telling me I deserve peace. But peace without you is just silence, Cordelia. And I have had enough silence to last a lifetime. Your grandmother. My grandmother has spent the last 5 days reconsidering every assumption she has made about what this family needs." He took her hands, and his grip was not gentle. It was desperate, the hold of someone who had let go once and refuse to do it again. She told me something this morning that I need you to hear. What did she say? She said that my father spent 20 years being loyal to a ghost, and that she would rather see me risk scandal with a living woman than watch me build a shrine to loneliness and call it duty. Cordelia's breath caught. She said that? She also said that if you broke my heart again, she would personally hunt you down and deliver a lecture so devastating it would be studied by future generations as a masterwork of maternal fury. But the first part was more relevant. Despite everything, despite the tears still drying on her face and the terror still coiling in her stomach, Cordelia laughed. And the sound of it broke something open between them, the last wall and the final pretense that this was temporary or professional or controllable. I love you, she said. I have been trying not to, but I am apparently terrible at not loving you. You are terrible at running away, too. You lasted 5 days. He cupped her face, the way he had when he first kissed her, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. I love you. Not because you are brilliant, though you are. Not because you challenge me, though you do. Because you are the only person who has ever walked into a room full of people who could destroy her and told the truth anyway. And that kind of courage makes me want to be brave enough to deserve it. He kissed her. This time, it was not careful. It was the kiss of a man who had spent 5 days in a library full of her absence, learning the particular cruelty of rooms that still smelled like someone you loved. She kissed him back with equal ferocity, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer as if proximity could make up for the days she had wasted being afraid. When they finally broke apart, breathing hard, foreheads pressed together, the library was dark except for the fire. We need to talk to your grandmother, Cordelia said. Tomorrow. Oberon. Tomorrow, he repeated, and kissed her again. The dowager was waiting in the morning room when they came down for breakfast, which meant she had been informed of Cordelia's return and had positioned herself for maximum strategic advantage. She sat in her usual chair, her posture immaculate, her expression arranged in a configuration that Cordelia had learned to read as I have opinions, and you will hear them. Oberon held Cordelia's hand as they entered. He did not release it. The dowager looked at their joined hands, then at Cordelia's face, then at her grandson's expression, which was open and determined and entirely without the controlled neutrality he had worn like armor for the past 14 months. Sit down, the dowager said. They sat, still holding hands. Isabeau appeared in the doorway behind them, hovering with the visible tension of someone prepared to intervene if necessary. Your Grace, Cordelia began. The dowager held up one hand. Before you deliver whatever speech you have prepared, and I am certain it is a very fine speech because you are distressingly articulate, I have something to say. She stood, moving to the window in what Cordelia recognized as the older woman's habitual thinking posture. I was wrong, the dowager said. The words fell into the room like stones into still water. Isabeau made a sound. Oberon went completely still. I was wrong, the dowager repeated, turning to face them. About you, Miss Voith. About what my grandson needs. About what this family needs. I spent so long protecting Oberon from the kind of consuming love that defined his father's life that I failed to notice the difference between protecting someone and imprisoning them. She looked at Cordelia directly. You did not pursue my grandson. You did not scheme or manipulate or exploit his grief. You walked into his life and told the truth, consistently, relentlessly, at personal cost, and he fell in love with you because truthfulness is the rarest and most valuable thing in his world. I should have recognized that. I did not, and the result was that you left believing you were not wanted here. I left believing I was not enough, Cordelia said quietly. The dowager flinched. It was slight, barely perceptible, but Cordelia saw it. "You are enough," the dowager said, and the words sounded like they cost her something. "You are considerably more than enough. You are what my son should have had, someone who sees the person behind the title and loves both. I failed to give him that. I drove away his wife with my disapproval and spent 30 years regretting it in silence. I will not make the same mistake with his son." She crossed the room and stopped in front of Cordelia. Then she did something that made Isabeau gasp, and Oberon's hand tightened convulsively on Cordelia's. The Dowager Duchess of Thornfield took Cordelia's free hand in both of hers and held it. "If you will have us," she said, her voice carrying a tremor that Cordelia had never heard before, "this family would be honored to call you one of its own." Cordelia could not speak. She looked at Oberon, whose eyes were bright with unshed tears. She looked at Isabeau, who was openly crying in the doorway. She looked at the Dowager, whose hands were warm and surprisingly gentle, and shaking with the effort of vulnerability. "I would be honored," Cordelia whispered. "More than I can say." The Dowager nodded once, released her hand, and straightened with visible effort. "Good. Now, we have work to do. Lady Blackwood's narrative must be dismantled before it takes root. Serena's lies need to be countered publicly. And if my grandson intends to marry a scholar, we are going to ensure that every drawing room in England knows exactly how brilliant she is before anyone has the chance to call her unsuitable." She began pacing, her tactical mind already engaged. "The Lattimore Ball is in 10 days. It is the last major event of the season. Everyone will be there. We will use it." "Use it how?" Oberon asked. "Your grandmother is right," Cordelia said, standing. "Serena has been writing the narrative. At the Whitmore exhibition, I reframed her story once. I can do it again. But this time, I need more than a clever observation about vellum. I need the academic endorsements. I need the Oxford letters. I need the evidence laid out so clearly that no one can dismiss it as a duke's infatuation with a pretty face." Oberon looked at her with an expression that was equal parts admiration and alarm. "You want to turn a ball into a scholarly defense. I want to turn a ball into a demonstration." Cordelia's chin lifted. Lady Serena said a pretty face would not save me. She was right. But she underestimated what would. The 10 days before the Lattimore Ball were a controlled frenzy. The Dowager leveraged every social connection she possessed, which was approximately all of them. Invitations were secured, conversations were seeded, and a quiet but persistent counter-narrative began circulating. The Duke of Thornfield's librarian was not a scandal, but a prodigy. Isabeau commissioned a gown from a London modiste who owed the Hale family a favor. Deep emerald silk, with gold thread at the bodice and sleeves, elegant and striking, and designed to make an entrance that could not be ignored. Oberon, for his part, did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He wrote to Sir Reginald Whitmore and asked him to attend the Lattimore Ball as his personal guest, bringing with him the authenticated Book of Hours and a willingness to discuss, publicly, the scholarship that had led to its reappraisal. Sir Reginald accepted with enthusiasm that bordered on the evangelical. On the night of the ball, Cordelia stood before the mirror in the blue suite and barely recognized the woman looking back. The emerald gown transformed her, not into someone else, but into the version of herself she had always suspected existed beneath the mended gloves and outdated dresses. The scholar who was also beautiful. The woman who carried authority in her bearing because she had earned it in her work. The Dowager arrived at her door, examined her with the thoroughness of a general inspecting troops before battle, and said, "You will do." Then she paused. "You will do extraordinarily." From the Dowager, it was practically a declaration of love. Oberon was waiting in the entrance hall. His gaze found hers as she descended the staircase, and this time he did not look away, or control his expression, or find a neutral point above her shoulder. He looked at her, the way he looked at a rare manuscript he had searched for all his life and finally held in his hands. "You are," he began, then stopped. He shook his head slightly. "There are not words. And I am a man who lives in a library." She took his arm, feeling the warmth through his sleeve, feeling the strength and the steadiness and the barely contained emotion. Together, they walked to the carriage. The Lattimore ball was blazing. Hundreds of candles, hundreds of guests, music pouring from the ballroom like light from an opened door. They entered together, and the whispers began immediately. A wave of sound that rolled through the crowd as heads turned and fans fluttered, and the social mathematics of London recalculated in real time. Serena was there, radiant in white silk, positioned near the center of the room like a queen holding court. Her smile when she saw Cordelia was sharp enough to draw blood. "Miss Vaith, how brave of you to return. I had heard you had retired permanently to the country." Cordelia met her gaze. "Retirement implies the work is finished, Lady Serena. Mine is just beginning." Before Serena could respond, Sir Reginald appeared, practically vibrating with excitement, carrying a leather case that contained the authenticated Book of Hours. What followed was not a confrontation. It was a demonstration. Sir Reginald introduced Cordelia to a cluster of collectors, scholars, and cultural figures with the enthusiasm of a man presenting a national treasure. He described her authentication methodology, cited the Oxford and Cambridge endorsements, displayed the annotated assessment she had produced for his own collection, and concluded by announcing that 3 separate academic journals had expressed interest in publishing her work. Cordelia spoke with the clarity and precision her father had taught her, answering questions about forgery detection, provenance analysis, and manuscript dating with an authority that left no room for doubt. She was not performing. She was being wholly and completely the scholar she had always been, in a room that was finally willing to see it. The crowd shifted. The whispers changed texture. What had been scandal became fascination. What had been doubt became curiosity. And what had been dismissal became, slowly, and then all at once, respect. Oberon watched from across the room, and when their eyes met, he smiled. Not the controlled curve she had seen at dinners and social obligations. A real smile, warm and proud, and so full of love that she felt it across 30 feet of ballroom like sunlight breaking through cloud. When the orchestra began a waltz, he crossed the room to her without hesitation. He did not ask with words. He simply extended his hand, and the gesture was so familiar, so reminiscent of the first time he had offered his hand at the auction house, that her breath caught. She placed her hand in his. They took the floor. This time, she did not think about steps or form, or the eyes watching from every corner. She let the music carry them, let his lead guide her, let herself trust completely in the man who had sent her work to Oxford, because he believed she deserved to be seen. "I want to ask you something," Oberon said as they turned across the floor. "Now, in front of everyone? I have spent 14 months hiding from life. I am finished hiding." He stopped in the center of the ballroom. The music continued, but they stood still, and the other dancers gradually slowed and stopped around them as the weight of the moment became apparent. Oberon took both her hands. "Cordelia Vaith," he said, his voice carrying across the sudden hush. "You walked into my life and told me the truth when everyone else was selling me lies. You cataloged my father's legacy with more care than anyone has shown this family in years. You stood in rooms full of people who wanted to diminish you and refused to be diminished. You taught me that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision that truth matters more than comfort. His voice roughened. I do not deserve you. I am a man who hid in ledgers and called it duty, who let grief become a wall instead of a window, who almost lost the most extraordinary person I have ever known because I was too afraid to say what I felt when it mattered. He released one hand and reached into his coat pocket, producing a ring she had never seen, a sapphire flanked by small diamonds, old and beautiful and clearly an heirloom. This was my mother's, he said. My father kept it in his desk for 20 years. He told my grandmother it was too precious to put in the family vault. I think he was waiting for someone worthy of it. He looked at her, and his eyes held nothing back. Will you marry me? Not because society expects it, not because my grandmother approves, not because it is convenient or strategic or sensible. Will you marry me because you love me, and because I love you, and because every book in that library makes more sense when you are the one reading it? The ballroom was silent. 300 people held their breath. Cordelia looked at the ring, at the man kneeling before her, at the life he was offering. A life she had never dared to want. A life built not on borrowed finery or temporary arrangements, but on truth, on scholarship, on the fierce and terrifying conviction that love was worth every risk it demanded. Yes, she said. Her voice was clear and strong and carried to every corner of the room. Yes, because you are the only person who ever looked at my notebook and saw life's work instead of a hobby. Yes, because you sent my scholarship to Oxford when you could have simply asked me to stay. Yes, because you make me brave, and I intend to spend the rest of my life returning the favor. He stood and kissed her in front of 300 witnesses, and the ballroom erupted. The noise was extraordinary. Applause and gasps and laughter, and at least one scandalized shriek from Lady Blackwood's direction. Isabeau was crying openly. Sir Reginald was applauding so enthusiastically, he nearly dropped the Book of Hours. And the Dowager, standing at the edge of the crowd in her charcoal silk, allowed herself a single, luminous smile. She raised her champagne glass an inch, the smallest toast, the quietest approval, and it was the most beautiful thing Cordelia had ever seen. 4 months after the Lattimore ball, Cordelia sat in the Thornfield Library, officially hers now in every way that mattered, cataloging the final shelf of the upper gallery. The work had taken longer than estimated. 14,000 volumes, 17 confirmed forgeries, 230 pages of authentication notes, and one published paper in the Journal of Classical Antiquities that had been cited 11 times in its first month. Her name, her real name, attached to scholarship that could not be dismissed or attributed to someone else. She was reaching for a volume on the top shelf when her fingers touched something that was not a book. An envelope, tucked behind a row of philosophical treatises, sealed with wax that bore the Hale family crest. She pulled it out carefully. The paper was heavy, expensive, slightly yellowed with time. The handwriting on the front was the late Duke's. For whoever loves my son enough to find this. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal. My dear stranger, if you are reading this, then my son has done something I hoped for, but dared not expect. He has let someone into the library, not as a visitor, not as a guest, but as someone who belongs here, among the books and the silence and the particular brand of loneliness that runs in this family, like an heirloom nobody asked for. I have hidden letters throughout this collection, in the volumes I love most, in the places where I spent my happiest hours. Consider them a treasure hunt, or a confession, or the ramblings of a man who could never quite say what he meant to the people who needed to hear it. This one is for you, whoever you are. My son will be difficult. He learned control from his grandmother and stubbornness from me, and emotional unavailability from watching both of us handle grief with silence instead of speech. He will bury himself in work. He will mistake duty for living. He will push you away and then be devastated when you go. But he will also hand you a book and tell you it should be read rather than preserved. He will remember what you said about poetry 3 weeks after you said it. He will stand in a room full of people and look only at you. And in that look, you will see everything he cannot say, which is vast and tender, and more than he knows what to do with. Love him anyway. Love him, despite the walls and the silence and the infuriating composure. Love him because underneath all of it is a boy who lost his mother before he could know her and is terrified of losing anyone else. And if you can, if it is not too much to ask of a stranger I will never meet, tell him that his father loved him, not in the way of duty or legacy or expectation, in the way of sitting in a library at midnight, writing letters to a future he cannot see, hoping that someone, somewhere, will read these words and know that the man who wrote them believed in love even when it cost him everything. Be brave, both of you. The books will wait. Life will not. With hope, Edmund Hale. Cordelia read the letter 3 times. Then she sat on the gallery floor, surrounded by 14,000 books and the ghost of a man who had loved his son the way he loved his library, passionately and silently, and with the absolute faith that someone would eventually come along who understood the language. She was still sitting there when Oberon found her, as he always did, drawn to the library the way he was drawn to her, by instinct and need, and the quiet certainty that this was where he was supposed to be. "What is it?" he asked, climbing the stairs to the gallery. "What have you found?" "Another letter. From your father." She handed it to him and watched him read. This time she did not look away. She watched every shift in his expression, every crack in the composure that was no longer armor, but simply habit, every moment of recognition and grief and gratitude that moved across his face like weather across a landscape. When he finished, he did not fold the letter. He held it open, rereading the final lines, his lips moving slightly as if committing them to memory. He knew, Oberon said. His voice was thick. He knew someone would come. He believed someone would come. That is different. Believing is harder. Oberon looked at her. "You came. I came armed with something else," she said, and smiled. He laughed, the sound bright and unexpected in the quiet gallery, and pulled her to her feet and into his arms. They stood among the books, holding each other, the letter pressed between them like a benediction from a man who had spent his life hiding love in the margins of the things he treasured most. Below them, the library stretched out in ordered rows, every volume catalogued, every forgery identified, and every shelf bearing the evidence of Cordelia's meticulous, passionate, relentless work. The work that had brought her here, the work that had proven her, the work that had given her a language the world was finally willing to hear. Outside, Isabeau's laughter carried from the garden, bright and irrepressible. The dowager could be heard instructing a gardener on the proper arrangement of the autumn borders, her tone suggesting that the roses had personally offended her. Mrs. Ainsley moved through the halls with her customary efficiency. Alice sang softly somewhere in the upper floors. Thornfield was alive, not with the desperate energy of performance or the brittle animation of social obligation, but with the warm, ordinary, extraordinary pulse of a family that had remembered how to live. Cordelia pulled back enough to look at her husband. His eyes were clear, present in the way that had once been so rare and was now so constant that she sometimes forgot it had ever been otherwise. "I love you," she said, in case the 14,000 books and the published paper and the marriage certificate have not made that sufficiently clear. "I require daily confirmation. I am emotionally needy. My grandmother says so. Your grandmother says many things. Most of them are correct. He kissed her forehead, then her nose, then her mouth, and the kiss tasted like tea and home and a sweetness that belonged to a life that had been chosen rather than endured. They never stopped finding letters. Every few months, a new one would appear, tucked into a volume Cordelia had not yet reached, waiting with the patient certainty of a man who believed that love outlasted silence. Each letter was different. Some were philosophical, some were funny. One was simply a list of his favorite words, which included luminous, persimmon, and the sound Oberon makes when he is pretending not to laugh. One was a recipe for a cake that his wife had loved, written from memory, with the note I have probably gotten the measurements wrong, but the principle is affection, which cannot be measured. Cordelia kept them all in a box made of cedar, beside the pressed lavender from the Herodotus, beside her original translations that had started everything, beside a pretty face will not save you, and the extraordinary truth that what had saved her was something else entirely. Knowledge, courage, the willingness to stand in a room and tell the truth, and the improbable, magnificent, terrifying discovery that sometimes, if you are brave enough, the truth is that you are loved. Thank you for being here. You are the reason stories like this exist, because you believe in characters who lead with courage instead of convenience, in women who refuse to be defined by circumstance, in love that is earned through honesty and vulnerability and the relentless decision to show up and be seen. Your presence in this space matters. Your engagement shapes what comes next. If a line moved you, if a scene made you hold your breath, share that in the comments. It helps more than you know. And if you are not yet subscribed, consider joining us. There are more stories coming. Stories of depth and heart and characters who fight for the lives they deserve. Thank you for listening. Thank you for staying until the end. You make this worth telling.